Welcome to the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. I'm Rebecca Jones. Since legendary interviewer Mishal Husain joined Bloomberg earlier this year, she's grilled the likes of Elon Musk and Keir Starmer, and now she's set her sights on Australia. This week, Mishal sits down with Malcolm Turnbull, who, as you might expect, has a fair bit to say about his old mate, US President Donald Trump. Mishal also asks our former PM his thoughts on US tariffs, China, and the way forward for AUKUS. Here's an edited version of that conversation. Mishal Husain with Malcolm Turnbull.
Given we do have another tariff deadline approaching, what do you think is going to happen in the run-up to that? What do you think that deadline means?
Well, it's very hard to tell with Donald Trump. He's so mercurial. His goal is to secure wins. So some concession, some arrangement that he can say is a win for him. But the one thing that is very clear is that the average tariff rate that the United States is imposing keeps on inching upwards, and it is likely to settle overall at least 20%. So this will be the highest tariffs in a century. And, according to, say, the Peterson Institute's estimates, will add an average annual cost of about $2,500 per household.
So that is a new reality then, that in a way it means perhaps governments, including Australia, shouldn't be scrambling too hard, or there's a limit to what they can do to try and negotiate this down. Are you saying this is going to be a new reality of tariffs and higher tariffs in international trade?
Absolutely. When I was dealing with Trump in the first administration, and I secured an exemption for Australia from steel and aluminium tariffs, his goal was largely to get what he regarded as reciprocity, so a level playing field. That's at least what he was saying. And of course, it was easy for me to make that argument because Australia has a free trade agreement with the United States. There are no tariffs on American imports to Australia, no barriers to investment, and they have a big trade surplus. So, as I said to Donald many times, you can't get a better deal than this. This is a fantastic deal. How can you improve on it? The difference today is that he has two additional goals, one which he had before in the background and the other one which didn't really feature. The one he had in the background was reindustrialisation, where he thinks he can use tariffs to create a tariff wall, protectionist wall, so that people will move their factories and industries into the United States and thereby avoid the tariff. And that's the point he makes all the time in every one of these letters, which are written with so many capitalised nouns. He says you won't have to pay any tariffs if you move to America. That was there in the first administration, but not to a great extent, but that big feature now. The second one, however, which is first and foremost, is revenue raising. And so he is seeing the tariffs as a way of raising additional revenues for the US government. And of course, ultimately it's going to be paid by American consumers. We know that, but he doesn't seem to acknowledge that. Americans will find out. But receipts from tariffs, customs receipts have shot up, as of course they would, because America's average rate of tariffs before Trump started this exercise was, 2 or 3% across the board.
I wonder more broadly how you feel about all of this politically. And I ask that because ideologically, you ought to share a lot with Donald Trump. You are a centre-right conservative. That's the tradition you come from. I assume that you have had and probably still have friends in the Republican Party. So what do you think happened to the Republicans?
Well, it's been taken over by Trump. I mean, you can call it a personality cult if you like, but he has taken it over. And Donald Trump, whatever you want to call him, is not a conservative. And he is certainly not a centrist. His political movement is based overwhelmingly on his personality, and it is founded or grounded in a series of notions about American primacy and America priority. some of which are, frankly, from an economic point of view, fallacious, such as his views on trade. I mean, he thinks if America has a trade deficit with a country, America is losing. If it has a surplus, it's winning. Well, you know, given the lack of savings in the United States and the fact that you need foreigners to finance it, it's inevitable that they're going to have a trade deficit with the rest of the world. But the bottom line is that he does not accept notions of comparative advantage, you know, which was Adam Smith wrote about hundreds of years ago. So when Trump and I would meet with Shinzo Abe, then the Prime Minister of Japan, he would berate Shinzo for the trade surplus that Japan has with the United States, and he would complain about that. And I would say, and I did so on one occasion publicly, I'd say, well, Donald, you know, you have a trade surplus with us, we have a trade surplus with Japan, they have a trade surplus with you, but none of that is unfair. But, you know, he was having none of it. He's had these views at least since the 1980s, and now he is in the position to implement them. The problem with this approach, Mishal, for America's allies like Australia, is that his goal, and it is an avowed goal, he makes no bones about it, is to enrich the United States, to make America rich again, as he says, at the expense of other countries, whether they are friends or rivals. And so from our point of view in Australia, we deeply resent having tariffs, any tariffs imposed on us, because we say that is in breach of the free trade agreement we have. And of course, Trump, just in case you missed the message that he believes that might is right and that the strong should be able to do what they will, while the weak suffer as they must, he adds in his letters this proviso. He said, I am imposing on you, you write to one country or another, this tariff on the basis that you impose no tariffs on American imports into your country, and if you dare to retaliate, I will increase the tariff on your goods by the amount you impose on ours. So this is strongman politics.
And are you confident that that brand of politics won't have currency in Australia in the future? Because your party recently lost an election with a candidate who had Trump-style messages, not exactly making Australia great again, but wanting to return Australia to what it was. And he was roundly defeated, and something similar happened in Canada.
Well, I think there are two different cases. In Canada, it was pretty clear. As you know, the Liberal Party in Canada, which is the centre-left party, was absolutely on the ropes, ready to be wiped out. Trump declared economic war on Canada, imposed or threatened massive tariffs, said Canada should be the 51st state. They changed the leader to Mark Carney, the former governor of the Bank of England, and miraculously they won the election. And that was a reaction. Canadians got together and they said no to Trump's bullying. And that's why Mark is Prime Minister of Canada. In Australia, we weren't suffering coercion or bullying of that kind. Yes, there'd been some tariffs. I think the problem that the Liberal Party, which in Australia confusingly is the centre-right party,
your party,
my party, led by Peter Dutton now, or was led by Peter Dutton. Since I ceased to be the leader in 2018, it has moved further and further to the right. And when I say further to the right, it has moved further and further into that right-wing, populist, angertainment media ecosystem that you see on the right, much but not all of which is owned by Rupert Murdoch. The big example is Fox News, of course, in the United States. Here there's the Murdochs own a cable TV service called Sky News, very different to the one in the UK, I might add, which is similarly aligned or inclined. And so if you decide in our system that your goal politically is to win the approbation of that right-wing angertainment media ecosystem, you are at great risk of losing the centre. You see, in Australia we have compulsory voting, so well over 90% of the people in Australia vote at an election, and we have preferential voting, what Americans called ranked choice voting. And that brings our politics, our electoral politics, to the centre. So if you're running off to the right, or indeed to the left, you run the risk of either independents coming through the centre and taking your safest seats, which is what has happened to the larger Liberal Party in Australia, or just simply centrists moving to the other team. And that's basically what happened, and it was a wipeout. So the right wing of the party, both inside the party and in Murdoch's media, who were behind the machinations that brought my prime ministership to an end, finally got what they wanted. They got control of the party, they got the leader they wanted, complete control, and they burnt it to the ground. And that's a great lesson. We're so lucky in Australia to have an electoral system that brings politics to the centre. I think America would have a better democracy if its electoral system was rather different, but the chances of that being reformed are pretty slim.
You've said that Donald Trump today is different from how he was in his first term when you were dealing with him. In fact, one of his early calls after his first inauguration was with you, and that was that was a tricky one. So you had a taste of it, but you're saying he's got different imperatives and extra goals this time around. So if you were in office now as the Australian Prime Minister, might you be deploying flattery? Because that does seem to work, whether it's Keir Starmer brandishing a handwritten letter from the King in the Oval Office, or whether it's Mark Rutte of NATO sending him extremely flattering WhatsApp messages.
Well, look, it didn't work for me. I mean, not that I tried. What worked for me was standing up to Trump. As you know, I had done a deal. I'd not done a deal. It was an agreement. It was a written agreement between Australia and the United States to resettle refugees in the United States. And Trump wanted to renege on it, and we had a huge argument about it. He became very incensed and furious. And he... but I guess the call started off with him saying, "No way, Jose," and ended up saying, "Yes, I hate you." And he was furious, said the call was the worst one he'd had all day, and so forth. And he was very angry. But after that, we got on very well. And the reason we got on very well, because he respected me, because I'd stood up to him. The problem with all the flattery and the sycophancy, and if it just goes on at the surface and it's just for show, just the kind of social courtesy, if it goes beyond that, he will recognise weakness and he will exploit it. And so that's why people who suck up to bullies invariably get bullied more. So I think with Trump, there's no point trying to be rude to him or punch him in the nose or anything like that. You've got to be strong, courteous, respectful, but above all, stand up for yourself, because that's what he respects. That's what he does. I mean, think about this, Mishal. J.D. Vance, who is, if you like, the future of the MAGA movement, and certainly perhaps a more openly thoughtful proponent of MAGAism than Trump. J.D. Vance has praised General Charles de Gaulle for having ensured in the 1960s, in the face of enormous American opposition, that France retained its sovereignty and its own control over its own military capabilities and above all over its own nuclear deterrent, whereas the United Kingdom did not. The UK's nuclear deterrent really cannot be operated without the concurrence of the United States. So de Gaulle was notoriously prickly and difficult as far as the Americans were concerned. This is Presidents Kennedy and Johnson. But here is Vance saying, I respect de Gaulle because he stood up for France, he put France first, and he said in that same interview that there is why should any European country be a permanent vassal of the United States? So look, Mark Rutte may have got through, and I know Mark, and he's a very brilliant guy and so forth. That may have got through a particular difficult point. But the key message for the Europeans is, and this is the message both from Washington and in their own self-interest, is to be self-reliant and not be dependent on the US. It's not, I mean, the MAGA movement, America First, is not seeking American primacy in the world. I mean, they feel they're entitled to that, but what they are expecting their allies to do is to be more self-reliant.
Donald Trump hasn't forgotten, certainly hasn't forgotten you, has he? When you said something in a Bloomberg TV interview earlier this year that he didn't like about America creating an opportunity for China, he ended up calling you a weak and ineffective leader, and essentially saying that that's why you lost power in Australia. Yeah,
well, I think he found me to be both strong and effective. So he's he was obviously watching the Bloomberg interview. It was quite funny, Mishal. I mean, I'd made some observations which I thought were pretty mundane, to be honest, namely that China will take advantage of this and seek to go on a charm offensive, seek to, promote themselves as defenders of free and open markets and free trade and international rules-based order, which is exactly what they are doing, of course. And he found that offensive. He was watching it in Washington and fired off this post on Truth Social, but it was posted just as I'd literally only just taken my microphone off my jacket and it was up online. So it was good, instant feedback, but just shows how many people watch Bloomberg.
Well, speaking of China, is the effect of all of this to push Canberra more towards Beijing?
No. I think Australia does not want to be enlisted in an American campaign against China. I mean, Emmanuel Macron, who I admire a great deal, spoke very well about this at the Shangri-La conference recently in Singapore, where he said, and he was really talking about France and other nations, if you like, middle powers, that is to say nations other than China and the US, should neither be enlisted nor bullied. So what it's in our interest, and as it is in the United Kingdom's, to preserve our sovereign autonomy and be able to chart our own course. Now, clearly our security partner, the sheet anchor, as they say, of our security arrangements in the United States in Australia is our alliance with the United States. But we do not want to be enlisted in some proactive campaign to slow Chinese growth, to inhibit the Chinese economy. I mean, yes, we would push back against economic coercion or indeed physical kinetic coercion. But from Australia's point of view, we're in this region. China is our largest trading partner. There are 1.5 million Australians of Chinese heritage. This is our part of the world where we live. China is the largest single nation in it, if you like, the largest single cultural influence in this part of the world, and has been for thousands of years. So we live with that, we work with that, but our critical obligation in Australia, and this is what every nation's critical obligation should be, is to stand up for their own rights. That's why I say, in many respects, America's allies need to be more like Donald Trump, not in the sense of running off on all of the extreme rhetoric and braggadocio, but simply to be putting their country first, but in a very clear-eyed way. And that's why we should be able to do more to defend ourselves, even in a circumstance where we don't have the Americans.
Okay, and I want to get to that, but I also want to put to you a couple of scenarios, and they're not completely hypothetical, because we live in a world where China has twice, I think, done live fire exercises off the Australian coast. But if there was a crisis over Taiwan tomorrow, how would Australia respond?
Well, the first question you've got to ask is, what is the crisis and how is the United States responding? I mean, if there was a war in the Pacific between the United States and China that began over Taiwan, no Australian government would make a commitment, but you could, as an outsider, you could reasonably expect Australia to be aligned on America's side. We have a treaty, the ANZUS Treaty with the Americans, and it certainly envisages that if either party were attacked in the Pacific, the other would come to their assistance. But how much do we have to? There's a lot of complexity here, and it is. Albanese was just been in China, and he was right to push back against people saying to him, "You should guarantee that. Why aren't you guaranteeing that you would, fight to defend Taiwan?" When no American president has given that guarantee. I mean, the United States official position, and Biden sort of wobbled a bit on this, but Trump's explicit position, including given in an interview to Bloomberg, I might add, on this, is not to make a commitment to defend Taiwan. And in fact, he's expressed the view, again to Bloomberg, that Taiwan may well be indefensible because of its proximity to China. So, I think that is my answer. I mean, you're dealing with the question to Australia is asking for a hypothetical on a hypothetical.
Well, except that the Pentagon officials have confirmed that they would like a clarification from Australia and Japan about what they would do in the event of a conflict with China over Taiwan. And they're asking for that from Australia at the same time as they're reviewing the AUKUS submarine deal. Yeah,
well, I think leaving Japan to one side, Mishal, the AUKUS submarine deal it was a very bad deal for Australia. Right, it was very unfair to Australia.
It scrapped the deal that you had reached to buy submarines from the French.
It scrapped the partnership we had. It was the partnership we were building submarines in a partnership with France. Yes, but the difference there was we were in control of our own destiny. We'd acquired the IP, we had the shipyard, we were going to build the subs. The problem with the AUKUS, what they call AUKUS Pillar 1 about submarines, is that the longer term plan is to have a partnership with the United Kingdom to build submarines, the first of which would be likely delivered sometime in the 2040s. Now, this new submarine has not even been finally designed yet. It's a very long way off. It could be 2050s for all you know. These projects tend to run late. They tend to be later and more expensive than planned. So, because of that decision, Australia's existing fleet of submarines is getting very old, and it would have what they call a capability gap, a period in which we'd have no submarines at all. So the Americans, generously said, we will sell you a number of second-hand Virginia-class submarines, which is their current attack submarine, SSNs, and several new ones, if you haven't got your own submarine production up and running then. So we'll help out. But they put a very big proviso on this, which is in the AUKUS legislation, which is that before any submarine is sold to Australia, the President of the United States has to certify that the sale would not degrade the undersea capabilities of the US Navy. Now, they are currently about 20 submarines of this type short of what they believe they need, and their industry, despite a lot of money being spent and a lot of efforts, has not been able to lift its production rate such that they're currently producing about half as many as they need simply to meet their own requirements, let alone any subs for Australia. So the point that Bridge Colby, the Under-Secretary of Defence, has made before he was Under-Secretary, and indeed he made this point in his confirmation hearings, is that if the United States is short of these submarines, and they are the most valuable and strategically important and survivable assets in their Navy, if they're short of these submarines, how can they responsibly transfer them to anyone, even to a friend? And so this is why I say the AUKUS Pillar 1 deal is a bad deal, because yeah, sure, giving money to the Americans to support their industry. We're building a base, a submarine base in Western Australia for the US Navy. We're spending billions of dollars on it, but we could very likely, I think almost certainly, will end up with no submarines, at least for a very, very long time.
You're listening to Mishal Husain, Editor-at-Large for Bloomberg Weekend's conversation with former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. You'll hear part 2 of that conversation in just a moment. This is the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. Welcome back to the Bloomberg Australia Podcast. I'm Rebecca Jones. Here is the rest of the conversation between Bloomberg Weekend Editor-at-Large Mishal Husain and former Australian Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull.
Let's say the submarines materialise at whatever point in the future, and America wants Australia to use them to patrol the Strait of Taiwan. Acceptable?
Well, Australian submarines do operate in the South China Sea already. And they operate, work with closely, there's a high degree of interoperability with the United States, and we work closely with the US and other allies and partners across the Pacific already. So that happens all the time now. The question is what do you do in the event of a conflict? And look, the reality is Australia, if there were a full-blown war with China, which hopefully did not turn into a nuclear war, because if it turned into a nuclear war, it may be curtains for all of us. But if there was a full-blown war with China, it is likely that Australian territory will be attacked, because there are American bases, they're Australian bases, but used by American forces on Australian soil. There are very important satellite communication listening posts in Australia and other facilities. There are Marines in the Northern Territory, there'll be naval ships in Western Australia. It is likely that Australia would be drawn into that conflict inevitably. But what is Australia's objective? Let's just leaving aside what America might want to do. Australia's objective is to have no conflict in this region. Australia's objective should not be to support American primacy in the region, such as might have been the case 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Our objective should be to ensure that the United States remains engaged, that's important, but that there is a balance. And so that we maintain a region where, in Lee Kuan Yew's much quoted words, the big fish can't eat the little fish and the little fish can't eat the shrimps, and we all manage to get along with each other, respecting our respective autonomy.
But is the effect of the last few months that China is getting bigger and more powerful, and therefore the era we're looking at is Chinese supremacy in the region?
Well, I don't think it's Chinese supremacy. Certainly China is more powerful. If you look at this hemisphere, you've got Japan, the third largest national economy in the world still, I believe. You've got South Korea also in the G20. You've got Indonesia, the largest Muslim majority country in the world, and I think the fourth largest by population, or third largest by population, and a host of other important economies and countries, including Australia, of course. So I don't think China's in a position to become the sole unchallenged hegemon in this region.
Yeah, and this point about self-reliance and Australian sovereignty, which you're emphasising, you've also called for an Australia-first approach to defence. And yet the realities are that your country is a middle power and it spends less than 2% of GDP on defence. Even in another decade, that's not going to change a huge amount. It's not going to go much beyond 2%
it's slightly
of GDP.
More than 2%, actually. But I agree. It's not a huge.
But the trajectory is not like what NATO is now committed to. And therefore, I wonder, how realistic is it to think that Australia can look after its own interest to a greater extent in a world where America is not the partner it was?
Well, it's clearly better. We're stronger with allies and partners, but at the end of the day, you have to be able to do what you can to defend yourself. And that's why when you're spending money on military capabilities, you have to be asking whether these are capabilities that are designed to support for example, the US Navy in operations off the China coast, or whether they are capabilities that are designed, long-range strike capabilities, which may include submarines, which are designed to keep any adversary, at arm's length. So it's the question. There is an unfortunate tendency in Australia for too many people to think that the best definition of Australian national security or even Australian patriotism is to be more and more tightly zipped onto the United States. And that is a dependency that the United States can neither deliver, nor is it one that they want or welcome. And this is the point that J.D. Vance has made, and Bridge Colby has made this point also before he was Under Secretary, that the United States has in the past, in effect, encouraged its allies to become dependent on them, a little bit like a parent that doesn't really want the children to leave home and encourages them to stick around at home, when in fact they should be saying, off you go, time to do your own thing. And it's vitally, we do not lose respect in Washington if we are seen to be fighting for our own corner and focused on our own interests, because that is absolutely what the American president is doing for his country. And he respects, look at the leaders that he respects, whether you like them or not. The other leaders around the world that he respects and pays great attention to are ones who are ruthlessly, often brutally, determined to defend their own country's interests as they see them.
Putin, you mean?
Yeah. Well, Netanyahu.
Or Xi Jinping.
Orban. Yeah. Take Netanyahu. It's brutal is probably an understatement, but although he wouldn't cavil at that, I imagine. But the point I'm making is that there's no point going to Washington. Look, I know people have been going there flattering Trump and so forth. Personally, I think it's a waste of time. In the imperial capital, they regard deference as their due, as their due. So,
one more thought on defence before we move on and wrap up, which is that is one possible lesson on this that Australia first in defence might have to mean nuclear weapons. I know you've said in the past that the capacity or the capability isn't there even if it wanted to, but it is one way that smaller nations have had to be taken very seriously on the world stage.
Mishal, that's a really good question. And the nuclear proliferation in this region has been really limited to, I'm talking about East Asia now, been limited to North Korea. But the countries that are close to the United States, like Japan and South Korea, for example, who certainly have nuclear industries and certainly would have the capacity to develop nuclear weapons very quickly, have not done so because they feel protected by the American nuclear umbrella. If they felt that protection, that support was unreliable or couldn't be counted on, then I think they would move to nuclear weapons very quickly. And I think you make a very fair point. Australia doesn't have a nuclear industry. We don't have a civil nuclear industry. We have a small scientific reactor, very limited expertise in that area. But you're absolutely right. I think the lesson. You look at Iran, for example. The American efforts to, it appears, successfully disrupt the Iranian nuclear enrichment program. That has obviously been a great relief to the United States and its allies, particularly Israel, and no doubt the Sunni states in the region as well that feel threatened by Iran. But you can imagine there would be many people in Iran today that would be saying our mistake was not to have developed a weapon already. And so I think we are on the brink, and this will be partly because of the United States being seen to be a less reliable ally. We are on the brink of greater proliferation. I mean, this is not a case of proliferation, but look in Europe at the way Britain and France are talking, the only nuclear powers in Europe, talking about working together to provide an independent nuclear deterrent, independent of the United States, to deter Putin. Now the French have always, as I said earlier, have always been determined to be independent. The British have not been. That's a huge change. And so, yes, I think I don't think that's a possibility that wouldn't be regarded as a serious one, or even probably within the Overton window in Australia at the moment, but it could well be in the years to come, depending on how this new American posture in the world evolves.
Do you miss the power?
I don't miss the politics and the horrible, it's pretty obvious. It can be a pretty ghastly business in terms of the pressures and strains and so forth. I miss the opportunity to do good things, to effect good reforms, and I've never enjoyed power for its own sake. A lot of people do. A lot of people pursue, power for a lot of people is like a drug. I mean, saying, why do you like power? It's like saying to someone, why do you like sex or chocolate, eating chocolate, for example. It's a passion. For me, power has always had to have a purpose to it. So I enjoyed having the office of Prime Minister, or indeed other offices I've had that have had political power, because of the things you can do with it. But you can't have these roles forever, at least not in a democracy, or you shouldn't be able to. And so I was glad to have the role when I did, and I was glad to be able to get as much done in the time I was allotted as I did get done.
And we'll let you go because you've given us lots of your time today. Thank you so much, Malcolm Turnbull.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for listening to the Bloomberg Australia podcast. I'm Rebecca Jones. This conversation was part of the Bloomberg Weekend interview, where host Mishal Husain speaks with influential voices in politics, business and culture from around the globe. You can find an annotated transcript of the interview with Malcolm Turnbull, as well as an archive of past conversations at bloomberg.com/weekend or in the Bloomberg app. Our special thanks go to Jessica Beck, Ed Johnson, Andy Clark and Paul Allen. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next week.